Are you tired of never being able to find the lumber that you want in your stack? Is your lumber taking up too much space in your shop? Or knocking over everything like you've got no coordination? Okay, so a little bit of a dramatic 90s infomercial for you guys, but I do actually have a problem storing all of my lumber vertically, mostly because some of the maple boards right back here are 10 feet long, and so the only place that they fit vertically in my shop is all the way there at the back. And because of that, I now have like 3 or 4 different spots in the shop that I'm trying to store lumber, so I'd really like to try and consolidate that, but I thought it was gonna be way too expensive for me to get a horizontal lumber rack solution that was one of those like metal racks that you see at all of the lumber stores. And so I was thinking about building one, and it was just going to be really expensive and really difficult. And then I was just like, oh, let's just Amazon it and see what Amazon has. And sure enough, there was one for 50 bucks. So I bought one, and it's got to be useful for something, but I'm going to go ahead and put that together today and then give you guys my initial impressions off of it so that you can see if this would be something that would be useful for you as well in organizing your shop. All right, let's get going. First and most important step always is actually read through the entirety of the manual. Doesn't make you any better of a woodworker if you don't read through the manual. Okay, so after reading through the directions, they're pretty good. This side actually shows you how to assemble the shelf itself, and this one is for all the different types of ways that you can mount it. The multiple pages are just different languages, so it is pretty short. I'll go ahead and assemble all of this together for you so that you guys can see it actually in person. But when you get this, if you get this, the directions are actually pretty useful. Okay, so starting off, I'm going to bring everything out. These are your horizontal racks that you're going to be using. So this is what's actually going to sit and hold your lumber on top of it, while these guys are going to be the vertical bars that they're attached to. Okay, so to assemble this guy, when you take these vertical bars, you're gonna see that there's a whole bunch of small holes and a whole bunch of big holes. Now the big holes are gonna be for the spacers, which are gonna go on the back, which keep it far enough away from the wall, because once you actually put the shelves on it, there's a little bit of this sheet metal that sticks off the back, and so the spacers keep this guy from resting directly on the wall, or by keeping it even with the wall itself. So there is actually a top and a bottom to this. See how far away this small hole is from here? This is the top. See how close this small is to the bottom? This is the bottom. So what you're gonna end up doing is you take one of these small screws. It's actually kind of a pretty nifty system, but you take one of these small screws, screw it in, and then from the top, take one of your shelves, oops, other side. Take one of your shelves like this, and you're gonna see one side has a little notch in it. That's the bottom that interfaces with the screw. Slide it from the top, interacts with the screw like that, and then you get your nice sturdy shelf that you can rest things on. So as an important note, because the shelf slides in from the top, you want to make sure that you do these one at a time. So screw here, shelf, etc. Because if you throw the screws in all of these holes, you're not going to be able to get your bottom shelf on because it can't slide past the screws that are up above it. So I'm going to go ahead and time lapse the rest of this process because the assembly is pretty well straightforward. And then when I move on to the next step, I'll pull you guys back in. There we go, so with all the shelves installed, they're pretty evenly spaced all the way up and through, or are evenly spaced all the way up and through. And the directions did note that if you wanted to put another configuration in here or another shelf space, all you would need to do is drill a 5/32 hole or a 4mm hole in this so that you could actually put that screw in, and then you can integrate it the same. Alrighty, so next up I want to put my lumber rack right about here where the rest of this wood is, and the way that I'm going to do that is it's a masonry wall right now. Instead of using masonry anchors, what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to hang it from the rafters right where it interfaces with the wall. So long as I have good enough fasteners that are going to go to the wall and to the rafters, I'm not adding any extra weight to the roof or to my rafters in the middle of my shop, which is what you really need to be careful about. If you're adding it right on the wall, everything that I've seen says that you shouldn't have any issue with it because it's interfacing directly with the wall. So be careful. Caveat on all of this is that you should check all your local building codes and make sure that if you're going to be adding a whole lot of weight to one of your walls, it can actually support that. I can't take any liability for any of the actions that you guys do, but I'm going to go ahead and clear out the rest of this lumber right here, and then we're going to go ahead and start getting that guy installed. Okay, so with all of that cleared out, I don't know if you guys can see it, but there's rafters that are spread up here, and the shelves are supposed to go anywhere between 4 and 6 feet apart, which is what they recommend. Now, that shouldn't change the weight bearing capacity of the shelves themselves, but what that will do is change what lumber you can store on it. So if you're going to be primarily storing really large, long pieces of lumber on this, 6 feet shouldn't be an issue. But if you're going to be storing pretty short, stubbier pieces, cutoffs that you're going to want to have on this rack, 4 feet's probably going to be the way you want to go. And because there's only a 110-pound weight limit for each one of these shelves, trying to put a like a sheeting of OSB on the bottom does take up some of that weight limit. So I may do that with one of mine, like on the bottom have kind of a cutoff shelf that's too long to fit on my shelf, but too short really to stack on its own, because I do also have a lot of really long ones that I'd like to put up here. Like I'd love to take that 10-foot maple and put it up top. So I'm going to go ahead and measure out to see what the span is between the rafters that I have above. All of this old building is off code, so you can't guarantee that it's going to be 16 inches on center or whatever the code needs to be for your area. So I'm going to go ahead and measure that and then show you guys what I'm using to actually hang it on the rafters themselves. Okay, talking head moment. So the problem that I have is that these guys are all 24 inches on center, or roughly 24 inches apart. I don't know if it's actually on center, but if I've got 2 feet here, that means I've got 4 feet here, and that's what I was measuring. And so if I'm trying to go between 4 and 6 feet, I either have 4 feet to go between these two or 6 foot to go between these two. The problem is I'm storing a bunch of tools all over on this side, and so I'd really prefer to do it over here. So I've got 6 feet, so 2, 4, 6 feet between these rafters here. The problem is then I've also got this window right here that I don't really want to block, but the other thing is I also need to balance all of my lumber nicely, because if I try to slide it one direction or the other, you are putting more weight on a single side of the rack, and if it's only rated for 110 pounds, that means you can't actually do 110 pounds if it's all sitting on one or it's balanced over more towards the one. So I think what I'm going to end up doing is doing the 4 feet here right in the middle, because that should give me the ability to do, if I have another 4 feet on either side, that gives me like 12 feet of total length, which is more than enough for what I'm going to need, and it will allow me to store the shorter pieces as well. So yeah, I guess a little bit limited by the rafters that I have to actually hang from, but it could be different depending on your situations. Okay, so to explain a little bit what the plan is, now that I have the 2 rafters picked out that I'm going to end up using, what I'm going to have is what are called hurricane straps. And hurricane straps, I mean, by their name, are intended to keep your roof on your house in the event of a hurricane. Now, they are rated for load bearing. I went on to, what is it, Simpson's website to actually see what the load bearing capacity of them was, and what I found was that the particular ones that I got were rated at 650 pounds a piece. So I've got 6 racks at 110 pounds. That's a hair over 600 pounds, but I'm planning on doing 2 of them per sets of rafter on either side. I'll show you a little closer what I'm looking at, and I'm going to actually have them on both sides. So it's not actually truly going to be an issue, because if you've got 110 split between the 2 of these, it's really only 55 per, so one should be fine, but I'm going to be doubling it up. Regardless, I don't actually think that I need to go into the specifics of how exactly I'm planning to do it, because it very well could depend on what your hanging situation is. All I'm going to say is this is my plan. Use common sense and good judgment when you're trying to hang it so that you guys are safe in everything that you are doing. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and bring everything in and start hanging the hardware and kind of show you guys what that looks like once it's hung. Voila, and it's all done. Now, you may be wondering why I hung it so high. You notice that it's basically almost all the way up to the ceiling, and I've got all this extra board underneath it, and that's because I measured how long this guy was going to be and made sure that I had plenty of space underneath it. If I wanted to add an extra rack down there, I could, but in the meantime, it gives me space to store stuff on the floor underneath it. One of the other things that you want to make sure that I measured is you want to try and make sure that these guys are either level or a little bit out of level facing up, because when you load them down, you don't want anything to slide off the front of it, and you'll notice there's no lips or shelves on these guys right here so that it keeps your lumber from coming off the front end. So when they're fully loaded, they are going to sag forward just a hair, and that you don't want your lumber to come off the front side. The other thing that I'm noticing as I'm hanging this guy up is that these shelves are pretty narrow. A 2x6 comes into about like here on it, so you're not actually going to be able to store a whole bunch of lumber on the way out, so that may institute me getting another rack just underneath it. The other thing, because I hung mine like this from the top there, these guys are loose like this, which means that if they weren't hanging in far enough, I could always add a small little block at the bottom here to bias all the shelves forward so that it would keep everything on the racks. Yeah, I'm really happy with how this guy turned out. I'm gonna go ahead and time lapse you guys as I load it up, and then we'll go through and see what things look like. Hey guys, Future Josh here. So I wanted to jump in real fast because as I was cleaning things up and as I was working around, I just was looking at the way that everything was hanging, and I didn't really like the way that it was hanging on the hurricane straps or the hurricane tie downs for the roof. They theoretically have enough capacity, it's just I'm hanging a lot of weight off those guys, and so what I really wanted to do is support them a little bit more intuitively like you would normally get in a wall. And if I had wanted to do this from the beginning, I would have gotten 2x6s that were 12 foot long or 10 foot long so that they were beyond this size, and I could have cut them down to the exact size that I needed. Because what I ended up doing, I don't know if you guys can see it from here. We'll spin it down 1 second. So what I ended up doing is I put 2 blocks in underneath it, and I started by trimming them to the right size so that they were very close and they basically fit right underneath. And then I took window shims and I shoved them in between the two so that I actually compressed it just a little bit and relieved a little bit of the weight that the straps were feeling. And then what I did is I just, over the top of it, I just pasted 2 2x4s. So what you're seeing here is not holding the weight in this lateral sense where those 2x4s are actually holding it. All those 2x4s are meant to do are just really put those two things together and keep them from separating easily. But on the inside, I actually have it compressed with window shims. But if you're gonna do something similar to this because you don't wanna use masonry bits or masonry screws, I would recommend just getting a board that's longer than you're gonna need to hang to start with. Set it on the ground, measure where you're gonna need it at the top, trim it off at the top, and then you just have it basically resting on the floor, and the only thing your straps are doing is really just keeping it from falling forward or around. So yeah, there's that. Will come back to me in just a second, but Future Josh giving advice if you were gonna do this differently. Okay, now that this guy's all loaded up, kind of first impressions. Both a pro and a con, because the shelves are pretty narrow, you can't fit that much wood on it, but that also means it's pretty difficult to exceed the weight capacity. I did notice when I had my giant maple beams up there, they're 2 inches thick, and so at 8 inches wide by 2 inches thick by about 10 feet long, they're about 50 pounds a piece, and so I can only put 2 up there, and then I threw a couple of just small scraps up there, which shouldn't take up a whole lot of weight. But then after counting all the rest of them that I have back here, I would basically need an entire another rack just for that maple back there, and it still may not fit it. So maybe I'm just a bad worker and need to go through my maple a little bit more quickly, but man, that stuff is really heavy, and I may still have a few of those leaning up. But overall, I really like the way that it makes my shop look a lot better. It definitely feels a lot more organized. And the other benefit of it being so narrow is that you can't stack it too deep, and so you basically get to see all of your lumber. Like all of my maple on this rack, I can see the edges of all of them, and so it should be pretty easy for me to get up there and just kind of flip through them real fast and see what things look like. But yeah, again, really the primary reason is that these that I did horizontal storage is because these guys are just too long up here to fit. Otherwise, getting kind of a vertical rack that would sit right here on the floor might be totally useful. So really just depends on what you're looking for. And I mean, for 50 bucks, pretty impressive. Alrighty, so there's the install of the Bora horizontal lumber rack, and you can use it for a variety of other things. I don't know. I'm really liking it. I'll see how it works in my shop, see if I can give it a go and see how well it just kind of works with my general flow and if I like it organized like that. And if I do, I'm going to go ahead and purchase another one. Which reminds me, all the things that you guys see in the episodes that I have, whether it's my tools or the supplies that I'm using, I have links for all of those down in the description. So if you want to do the exact same thing that I'm doing, you have all of the links to go ahead and do that. And they're affiliate links, so they do support the channel. Full disclosure to that, I do get a small 1% cut out of everything that you guys do. So I really do appreciate it, because the more that you guys want to do the same projects that I'm doing and you use the same supplies that I am, the more it supports the channel. So thank you guys tons. I really appreciate it. And yeah, if you guys want to install this rack as well, I would love to hear how it went for you, how it works for you in your workflow. Or if you have a better rack that has a higher weight capacity without blowing the budget out of the water, I would also love to hear from you, because I'm shocked by all of the things that my viewers find and all that you guys find, because you guys have your fingers all over the internet. So let me know if you have something better. I am all ears. I'm always looking for something better, and I'm always looking for improvement. So thank you guys for joining me today. I really appreciate it, and happy woodworking. Bye.